2022 recap. Go, Neil.
Starting in January. Okay, week 1.
In one paragraph or less.
Sum up the whole year.
Yeah.
Well,
In 2 words.
let's 2 words. I got it. Annus horribilis.
Oh, yeah? I got 2 words. Clown shoes.
Clown shoes. Good one. I borrowed the Latin phrase used by Mom, who of course passed this year.
Yes. Her Majesty. No, yeah, it should be on the cover. Time magazine. They should do it as well as a person of the year. They should do a theme of the year, and it should be the Time magazine that nobody reads really anymore, except for when they do their person of the year, and then they just look at the cover. It should have a theme of the year, and it should be just a big pair of clown shoes. 2022, and then a pair of clown shoes.
I agree.
Yes. Do you think it's? Do you think the problem is? Of course, I don't know. Maybe some people listening to this don't think there's a problem. I think most of them do realize that there's a problem, and I'm wondering what the source of the problem is. Do you think the problem is? Do you think it was always? People were always this clown shoey, that there have been a significant number of people always in the population who are that kind of,
Juvenile,
just outright stupid, can't think properly, don't care to think properly, they're not interested in facts or truth, it's just how they feel? Or is it that it's got worse? I mean, is it the internet effect, essentially, that giving... You could say that there's always been that a significant number of people of that nature in the population, but generally speaking, like most other people, they kept to themselves because they didn't have any platform. But now that the internet gives all these people a platform, they can broadcast themselves into your brain. And is that distorting our picture of how screwed up the world is, simply because the people who ordinarily would never have a voice suddenly have one, and it's not a very nice noise. It's quite it's like Neil's on a chalkboard. Do you think that's the case, or do you think it's getting worse objectively in terms of society, like say Western society? Because we can only really speak about Western society and primarily, to any great extent, Western society. And but do you think it's gotten more?
It's gotten worse.
Divided.
It's gotten worse.
More people are more antagonistic. People are more anxious, maybe, or more upset, or more angry, more just negative things. Basically, have people gotten worse in that respect? Human nature has the more negative aspects of human nature, have they been accentuated over the past X number of years compared to, like, say, 20 years ago or more than 20 years ago?
Yeah, definitely.
You think so?
Yeah, this is the observation versus objectivity question.
Yeah.
So in space, are they seeing more near Earth asteroids and meteor fireballs because they're observing them more, or because there objectively are more of them there?
Because of cell phones.
In that issue, it's actually the latter. There are more of them, but none of them reporting this will admit to that. They always go for it's just because we're better, we're smarter.
Well, more cell phones is what they say.
More cell phones for meteors, but for near Earth
objects,
things out there in the inner solar system, they said, well, that's because we're funding more, and they're not. The funding's gone way down, and they see more and more every year. Yeah, there are now like 30,000 and so on. But
so as above, so below. Then
it's observer versus objectively they're the worst, and you can slice it a whole number of ways, but
because you see people with that take on social media all the time, that they project how they're feeling, what their narrow view, their narrow frame of reference for things, and how they feel about certain things, and they project that onto the world, and they say, this is the way, this is terrible, look at the state of the world because this is how I feel. They use one example of one person, and then they use that as to tar the whole thing, basically, you know what I mean? And I'm like, well, you're one person talking from the UK, for example, or from the US, or from anywhere in Western Europe, let's say one country, say it's UK, it's got 65 million people. You're talking about a small percentage of those people that you're referencing in your social media message, and you're forgetting about all the other people in the country. You're forgetting all the people in your part of the world. And you're forgetting about the large majority of the population who don't actually speak English, who don't care about anything that you're talking about. They don't even know about what you're talking about. Like the 1.5 billion people in China, the 1.5 billion people, close to 1.5 billion people in India, and all of Southeast Asia and stuff. You know, that's the majority of the population, a big majority of the population of the world. And they have no idea what you're talking about. They don't see the world at all going in the way that you're.
I'm pretty sure they're also complaining
about their own particular things. Yeah.
Everyone's complaining.
Yeah.
And everyone thinks they're sure that they're complaining about the issues.
Right. So all this
mess,
social stuff and my
mess.
prejudices and that kind of stuff, where I see the world going bad because of my particular perspective on the way the world should be, and I look at these other people are doing it wrong, let's say, and I'm complaining about that, and but there's a great that's subjective. Can be said to be subjective, but there's a great leveler, which would be things like energy, food supply, well, mainly those two really, income, obviously, jobs, that kind of thing. That's across the world. The global economy, basically, is the thing that you could use as a reference for whether or not the world. You can talk then about the world in that context.
And security as opposed to war.
Right.
Well, it's interesting. Materially, things have never been better.
Right.
And that includes for what used to be called the third world.
Right.
On the war security issue, never been better. There's fewer wars than before. But something else is going on. For some reason, there's pressures coming into the system, in quotes, that's affecting everyone. And it seems primarily all it needs to do is affect those at the top, the elites, and then it rubs off or translates into paranoias, fears, concerns, parroted by other elites just below them and so on, down and out through society.
I think
the question is, should they be concerned, given that materially things have never been better? Well, at least until a couple of years ago. That's the strange part. Why? If objectively, materially, more needs are being met than ever before, why are people losing their heads?
Less content,
And this is being discussed by, famously by Peterson. He's talked about it with Pinker and others. And Peterson I think he's I think he's wrong about a lot of things, but I think he's correct overall in explaining that it's to do with meaning. You can give people all the material comforts they want, but they don't have meaning anymore for a narrative as a story that makes sense at their core. Maybe that's it. Maybe that even isn't even deep enough. I don't know. Why is it that core narratives are falling apart? Why didn't they just keep on working along with material benefits, and then everything would be more or less fine? Instead, it's just this. Well, I don't know what the metrics are, but it does seem like people are getting really, really crazy.
Because I like that
road rage incident is going way up.
I like to kind of get
stress levels.
I like to get out of my own head as often as possible in terms of the way I'm looking, because I'm looking at the world and I'm looking at it from various different aspects and various different metrics on the globe, and I'm seeing a certain picture, that it's all going wrong. But from my perspective, right, that there's something really that we're on a downward slope here. But I remind myself that I have to remind myself that that's a lot of that is based on my perspective, my personal subjective perspective on how the world should be working, how the world should go, what should be happening in this particular area, what should be happening in this particular area. But from the point of view of again, from my perspective, what would produce a just, happy, content, stable society. And I see various different aspects that are going in the opposite direction, and I see kind of problems in the near future, and I don't like that picture that I present for myself. But then I go, well, hang on a minute, maybe I'm just biased. And then I go and I poll, in a certain sense, other people to see what they're saying. And then, but I see a lot of conflict from them as well. People from, let's say, who would have the opposite perspective, political, social, economic, whatever perspective to me, and they're complaining as well. They think it's all going wrong as well, but from their from their own point of view, you know. And obviously their solutions to what should be done about it are different from mine. But everybody seems to be, at least in the West, who have the privilege of being able to like look at the world and comment on it and opine on it and stuff. They all seem to, generally, the ones that do that seem to be not happy with the course that the world is on. And I try to remind myself about all the other people who aren't on social media, which is probably, you know, actively on social media, probably 80-90% of the world's population aren't on it in any, you know, to any great extent. Certainly not commenting. Maybe they're doing Facebook pictures of their breakfast, but that's about it. But they're still picking up on stuff from their local governments and all that kind of stuff, and their local media, et cetera, you know. So there's the active viewers, the active people who are actively looking at it and getting involved, and this is a problem, you know, we need to sort this out, and complaining about it. And other people who are passively absorbing the data from government and media, not on social media. But I think they also, at least in the Western world, are also disquieted about what they're hearing, you know. I just try and get I'm just trying to understand if this is the whole world problem or if it's just our problem.
Well, for me, it was clarified by 2020. What happened there? Now, I'm aware that my perspective is subjective, but it's so strong that I'm not ever going to go stray far from it. That was
a bad
horrified
idea.
by what took place in 2020. And I believe it to be bad for everyone. Right. I'm aware that that's subjective.
Right, because there's a lot of people that say, no, it was good for everyone.
Fine. I understand that. But I'm watching them say that and then watching the results on their immediate family, if not their own, the person articulating their own health right now, 3 years later, their own bank account balance 3 years later. Their own fears and weird behaviors in any kind of areas since then, not necessarily related to the quote unquote pandemic.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. It helped, so to speak. It helped me to clarify that this world is completely screwed because elites just went off the rails. They went, we cannot forget. And this only just ended in January this year. That's I think what I want to open the year with. How many remember that the Freedom Convoy in Canada was this year? I thought you were like, no, that was 2020. Well, that was last. No, it was this year. It was 10 months ago. It ended. Try to remember not just the basically nationwide rebellion in Canada, but why that came to a head. The Canadian government was at the leading edge of an overall Western wave of intensifying pressure on people to get vaccinated or else lose your job. They had obviously threats to employment, threats to your bank account, threats to your personal, you know, they were serious threats. You had the American president this time last year saying, if you don't get it, you will die this winter. You will die last winter. You had the Austrian government,
death and suffering or something, or death.
You had the Austrian government saying, if you don't get it, you're staying in your home, and the police will not let you outside the doors unless you get it. If you do get out, you'll be fined. If you don't pay the fine within 2 weeks, you'll be fined tenfold that, and so on. That was all to kick in this year, and then the vast majority of that wave washed out or retracted because of the invasion of Ukraine by Russia.
Suddenly different priorities, which exposed the fact that they
we
weren't
came
that
very close. Oh my God. I suppose if we go back to what we were saying before, that's what's changed. If organized power is able to do that, corporate / government / health, organized, whatever,
fascist.
And on a global level, and with a united organizing pressure, with effects on the globe, even on countries where governments are not on board with it. It was happening in those countries anyway. It was having totalizing, what your man Desmet would call mass formation psychosis effects on the entire population globally. So after that, like, there's no doubt for me anymore. It's objectively getting worse.
Yeah, it's going down. Yeah, that was a bad totalitarian turn that governments in unity took.
Yeah. And I also would posit that did not happen before that point in time, this overall current point in time, because that could not have happened. It took progressive progressions from the point of view of someone willing and encouraging this movement, but devolution, digression, the opposite of progress for those of us like, how do we get to this point? It took a lot of steps. You know what I mean? It couldn't have happened before now, objectively, I think. We were on the leading edge of a global totalitarian wave this year because of the underlying changes that enabled it. People were...
I mean, beforehand,
more
COVID.
people were amenable to it, yeah.
No, COVID. You mean the preparation was from 2020 when COVID launched?
That and other things. I think the war on terror was part of it as well. Psychological effects on people.
Yeah, insecurity, fear.
Yeah.
Government pushing fear.
First it was anyone can be a terrorist. Well, ideally that Muslim over there. But then it was broadened out. Actually, any of you,
Domestic.
in fact, you're all suspect.
Mass shootings.
Mass shootings had an effect as well.
Which weren't limited to America. Over the past number of years, mass shootings or stabbings and stuff were popping up in different places around the world. So it is global. There's something global happening. It does have effects globally, but it tends to be concentrated in the Western world for some reason. It tends to be focused there for whatever reason, but it definitely does have tentacles, let's say, all around the world in terms of the impact that it has. But I thought it was interesting, though, that the extent to which they were getting their knickers in a twist and going, full totalitarian almost with the COVID vaccines. And then suddenly it all went away because Russia invaded Ukraine. That doesn't speak well for their commitment to the idea. If an invasion can suddenly make, vaccines, whatever, that's not important anymore. It exposes the fact that there was a certain amount of fakery about that, i.e. the what they were saying about vaccines and the need to get vaccines wasn't really the whole reason why they were pushing the vaccines. It wasn't only about public health. It was about compliance. I mean, Macron in France was kind of almost explicit about that, where he when he was targeting the unvaccinated, he said he wanted to piss them off because they had, the unvaccinated. This was probably shared by many governments in Western countries anyway. That any dissent on against government mandates of any kind, but in this case, vaccine mandates, was not viewed very well. It wasn't viewed. They didn't like it, let's say, because it was almost taken as a personal insult. How dare you say no to me? It's not that you're saying no to me on this particular topic. It's just the fact that you're saying no to me. I don't like the fact that you're saying no to me, and that's totalitarianism in essence.
And there's no reason to suspect that they don't still see us that way.
Of course, yeah.
So,
well, that didn't just start then either.
So
governments have always had that kind of
clown
attitude.
shoes world, yes, but they're armed.
Yeah. Well, the clowns...
they're dangerous.
Yeah, they're armed and dangerous clowns. They're the spooky clowns, the crazy clowns, the scary clowns. But yeah, the clown shoes aspect is more to do, for me, and it was more to do with the public response from it. I see a lot of people out there sporting clown shoes in terms of how they're responding to what we're talking about, how they're not seeing the totalitarian nature of, for example, the totalitarian type nature of the COVID vaccine mandates. So it's not about, we're not discussing vaccines themselves here or anything like that. We're talking about the attitude and the tone of government messaging towards the population around vaccines. It's not up for debate, I don't think, for any reasonable person. It's not in question that governments did take a tone,
hard line.
A very hard line, or a totalitarian tone with all of that.
Yeah.
You could say it was justified, but it doesn't exclude the fact that
they can justify it and others can believe it. And I understand that we acknowledge that we're subjective in our horror at it. But it's going to have objective effects. But here's something that it's not related. It predates all this. Do you remember that? We won't play it now because it's too long to play, but it's still only a couple of minutes. It's worth looking up. It's a time lapse someone did of all protests globally. So it's a map of the world, and the timeline is played in video, and the protests pop up as lights, maybe in a city. And they had some criteria. It had to be significant enough. It didn't matter what the protest was about. It could be about austerity measures. It could be about saving the planet. Left, right, they weren't making any subjective criteria based on what is or not a valid protest. It was just like the numbers, how many people turned up. It's crazy. It goes from like the 70s, when there were famous protests of various things in the United States and Europe.
Vietnam War,
anti-war protests still going on. And then it tracks it all the way through. And I think it ends in about the maybe 2010 or something. So from that point on, well, you can imagine it's still... Anyway, it shows like little flashes around the world. And you go through time, and it's flashing much, much faster now. And you're just going through time at the same speed, but now it's flashing like crazy. By the time it stopped, the world was blinking. The whole world. But objectively, through those decades, people did better.
Exactly,
in
but
material terms.
Exactly, but that's what they're protesting about. So all those flashes were flashes of democracy. That's what the State Department would say. And the State Department looks at, they see just democracy flashing all around the world.
There's a subjective element here. To what extent were they encouraged, manipulated, and so on into activism? There's a hidden hand, but not everything's conspiracy. And all these things, you've got to consider a sliding scale of structuralism versus agency. It'll never be 100% agency is where everything's a conspiracy and it's all planned and predetermined. Structural is purely all history is just drift. It just happens,
stuff,
random chance. There is obviously a big element of NED funded protests and color revolutions and stuff like that. But even then, this is literally a global picture, stepping back away from whatever it subjectively the protest was about. I took from it that people are, if it's not anger per se, then it's concern, stressed about, if they believe the climate stuff. Well, the kids school strike, those kids were coming out of school really believing that they wouldn't make it into motherhood years and wouldn't have children of their own because the planet's going to end like
global
next
warming,
year or something.
Maybe it could be tracked as well with in terms of population. I'd say if you took a room full of with say like 5 people in a decent sized room with 5 people in it, and you charted over, imagine you confined these poor people in this room for decades. I mean, say they were happy enough to be there, whatever. But you added more and more people progressively. I'd say the more people in a room and the less space each individual personal space each person had, the more arguments would occur.
Arise.
So as a population, and do we need to depopulate the planet? Hot potato, Neil. Come on. Malthusian.
No, you're saying... The bigger the crowd, the more likely to have more random
population has
factors.
increased quite a lot since 1970,
It has, definitely.
People crammed into cities.
But there are counter examples. What about large countries where there's still social cohesion is impressive, i.e. the number of protests and instability is remarkably low, where if it's just a numbers game, you'd expect it to be high. Like Nigeria has had problems with terrorism because a portion of its population is Muslim minority, but it's remarkably cohesive. Nonetheless, China is 1.5 billion. I know we had the thing 2 weeks ago. Oh my God, look at all the protests in China, but they were tiny. They were tiny. We did an analysis here. We extrapolated the numbers. They were tiny compared with the country. So a remarkable social cohesion of a 1.5. You would expect as China's numbers grew and grew, by now it's just a complete basket case.
Right.
Yeah, so you can have organizing principles at some scales, even with larger and larger numbers, where in fact there's harmony, relatively.
Yeah. As long as there's enough living space, basically, enough resources, then people aren't going to...
That begs the question, is there a disharmonizing factor that's pushing on everyone?
Yeah. Well, ultimately, if you probably would have to conclude that there is some X factor involved in all, because you can go through all of the different issues within any given country and therefore globally and show how that would give rise to protests or discontent, social unrest, etc. But when it's you can't pin it down to any one thing, and even if you put all those things together, you're not going to come up with one answer to it. It's all of these different factors that are causing all of this unrest. It does seem that there's like you said, an X factor, some force being exerted, waves of something. I don't know. Who knows what it is, but
it gets cosmic rays.
Yeah, well, it gets very complicated at that point when you're talking about human consciousness and human, people's just thoughts and the way they see the world and what's going on within them and what's going on collectively within a population. It's very, very complex, extremely complex system to navigate. So, but anyway, yeah, I think we can conclude that the world is significantly more chaotic than it used to be.
Yeah.
And it goes hand in hand with the rise of, I think, technology and the rise of social media as well. I think that is an exacerbating factor to some extent. But like I said, people have to remember what you read in social media is not representative in terms of what, the feelings or the idea you get of how people are thinking and feeling on social media is not representative necessarily of the rest of the population, which is the large majority of the population in most countries. You have to go out and ask people in the street, do you use social media? No. Okay, what do you think? What's going on? How do you see the world? Do you think the world's okay? And then ask them what are the factors that make them feel that way.
Americans, for example, are polled regularly about what they think of the government, Congress, military. There's a breakdown, but then there's a question about the overall trend the country's moving in, and they're consistently high. Like 70 to 80% think it's going in the wrong direction.
Right.
And that, I don't know about under Trump, but certainly in the Biden years, Gallup, Pew, scientific polls.
Yeah.
Is their sample good? I think it's good.
Yeah.
It certainly conforms my bias of of how I think it's going. It's going bad. And I don't think Pew and Gallup would be seeking to undermine, because they would want to, if anything, they would have a bias the other way to uphold the institutions of our beloved democracy, yada, yada, yada.
Yeah.
But they consistently get an answer that churns out a figure of 70, 80% think things are going south. That's just in the United States.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Where they have it best.
Technically.
Relatively.
Materially. Which gets back to your point about what Peterson talks about meaning and stuff, that isn't, meaning isn't found in material goods or material riches for most people. It's actually negatively correlated, I think, sometimes with meaning and a sense of satisfaction and fulfillment in life. Is, the richer you are, maybe the less happy you might be.
Here's another set of statistics. Very much a theme this last year: rising excess deaths.
Yeah.
So they're objective. Would you agree?
Yeah, of course.
Because there's very specific criteria about what they mean.
Well, they're published by governments, so.
Yeah. Got one here from the European Commission for EU. This is up to October of this year. Excuse me, no, 16th of the 9th, so September. Excess mortality hits 16%, the highest 2022 value so far.
Yep.
Where, it had been 7-8% in June and May.
Yeah, and it's weird to think that they're not addressing that. The British government, the French government, other countries that have those excess deaths are not addressing them, except some people are, but government officially isn't addressing it. They're saying that it's due to lockdowns, due to kind of mothballing or cancelled appointments, etc. in the healthcare system, which in itself is a problem. Is an example of bad governance, where the government decided to shut down health services to a large extent in many countries, denying people access to primary healthcare, and then causing what we're seeing now, which is an excess deaths, non-COVID excess deaths. Did you put it up there?
Let's put it up. It's interesting, the variety across Europe. In some countries, it's actually gone down.
Yeah.
In other countries, it's gone way up. 16% is the average. So I sent it to Scott there. This is from Eurostat, so it's the European Union's own statistics department.
Yeah. Well, we know that. We've talked about that before. Excess deaths are up for most of this year across many countries, from Australia to America to everywhere in between. But like you said, some have gone down.
Fourth paragraph, excess mortality varies across EU member states, with 8 member states recording values like Spain plus 37%, Cyprus 33%, Greece 31%. Then in the east, Latvia has gone down a little. Estonia down, Lithuania down, Italy up 20. Okay, so what was that?
That's to do with population.
Explain why that statistic
demographics.
would be interesting. What were the kinds of figures attributed to COVID in 2020? It wasn't 16%. Excess deaths weren't up that much, right? It was something marginal, wasn't it?
Over the whole year, what, per year? In 2020, it was about, so say, 100,000 in the UK, when there was an average of 50,000 per month. Deaths. So 50,000 per month times 12 is 600,000. So 100,000. You know, it was somewhere in and around that for COVID, at least. Again, you have to get into COVID reporting, COVID deaths with COVID, without COVID. But let's say for the year of 2020, excess deaths due to COVID were about that 15-16%.
The reason I thought there would be a massive discrepancy, i.e., it's much higher now, is because John Campbell is surprised by these figures, because he's like,
oh, he's surprised by them because vaccines have rolled out and the COVID isn't killing anybody anymore. So why are you having excess deaths? You could explain excess deaths during 2020 and into 2021 because of COVID.
I thought he was saying the excesses are higher now.
They are. Yeah.
And he's
but
like,
it is surprising.
Nobody's talking about it.
Yeah, exactly. It is surprising because it was similar excess deaths. Basically, you have similar excess deaths during non-vaccinated population with COVID as you have with vaccinated population with COVID.
Okay.
And the only way you can explain it is, well, yeah, people missed out on their cancer screenings and their, screenings for other heart issues, et cetera, because we shut down the healthcare system. But it's as bad, but they don't care. So it's basically as much, if not more, deaths now, excess deaths now, as during COVID, when governments and everybody and their granny freaked out or were encouraged to freak out over this number of deaths. And now with the same number of deaths, you have silence. It's not such a big deal. Again, it exposes the cynicism and the lack of sincerity, I suppose, about that hysterical messaging, etc., about COVID deaths, that everybody was dying and everybody was going to die, when you have a similar amount of deaths now and nobody cares. It's extremely cynical, and it's one reason why really people should always take that kind of government hysterical messaging with a large grain of salt, because they really don't care. It's not, they don't, ultimately government really doesn't care about the people and the population. They don't care about you as an individual or even collectively. But they had an agenda at the time, which was to, I don't know what their agenda was. I mean, we can speculate what their agenda was, but it seems to me that it was an experiment in totalitarianism. And that was the primary motivation, was to do what we say, do what we tell you to do. But now, when you have something going on causing a similar amount of excess deaths, not interested.
No.
What about Putin? Yeah, let's talk about him instead.
Putin did it, yeah.
So,
well, just on that note, what I'm sure people would like to think that Canadians standing up and others elsewhere is what the amount of resistance the governments were getting from people is what caused them to back down this year. Do you think there's any merit to that, or is it, as I surmised talking to you earlier, that what changed overnight was that Putin invaded Ukraine?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And then all priorities just flipped over here.
Yeah. Well, we give an example of that from history, actually. We talked about it sometime in the past, in how we kind of have evidence that the war on terror was an idea that came online, and it was decided primarily in Washington, D.C. Obviously, it was America was leading the war on terror, right? But that war on terror was not something that landed in the laps of the Americans, but rather something that they thought up and decided to push on the world, to put out there and push on the world as, here's the new thing. The new thing is a war on terror. I mean, the evidence we have for it is relates to the conflict in Northern Ireland in the mid-90s or so. You had a delegation of both sides of that conflict in Northern Ireland going to Washington, D.C., because Washington was the arbiter of the peace process and all that kind of stuff. And one of those members of the delegation was told by a British intelligence agent in the State Department, who was there, on secondment or whatever, and he told this guy from Northern Ireland, who was part of the political parties that were party to the conflict. He said, listen, the conflict in Northern Ireland is going away. The Troubles, as they call it, is basically, we're doing away with that.
Mm-hmm.
It's been going on for 30 years, but we're doing away with it now. Because this guy was very skeptical about the peace process actually happening or having any success. And the guy said, don't worry about it. We're going to make it go away because we have a different priority, which is the war on terror. And it's verbatim quoted by this guy in a book, and he said this is what was told to him. So it's an example of how, again, in terms of COVID and the conflict in Ukraine, comes along, and it's like, okay, we're going to make COVID go away because we've got a new thing now. And people are like, but that's not how those things are meant to happen. It's like, those, like, they're structural, right? Those are things that come along. They're problems that are landed on the world's lap, and you have to deal with them. You can't just say, okay, we're going to make that go away. You can't make things like, what do you mean? Unless you thought it up, you can't make it go away. Unless you fabricated it, you can't make it go away. If you fabricated it, you can say we're calling an end to it and we're putting it away because we created it.
Well, it didn't completely go away.
Well, no, but largely.
But the pressure, the enormous pressure people were under, went away.
Yeah.
And since then, courts have ruled that if you were fired or fined during lockdowns or for refusing to get vaccinated, you're entitled to your money back and your job back, and full back pay.
Yeah. So it did all just end, basically. The whole narrative switched. It flipped. The narrative flipped, and it all went back to, like, a normal approach then was taken to the whole COVID situation. The approach that should have been taken all along was suddenly taken because we've got something else to focus on.
I think when we were reviewing last year, or maybe 2020, I said something like, geopolitics is dead. That's it.
Because of COVID,
Well, yeah, and it's all basically one world government, and it's going forwards as one march off the cliff together. I thought that's the end. And then this year, it comes back with a bang, like, you know.
We've got Putin to thank for that.
Yeah. Thanks, Putin.
I'll get you banned.
Made geopolitics great again.
Yeah.
Before we go on it, though, what about the supply chain crisis? That was the term of 2021. It's still an issue, right? Or is it? I found something.
It's kind of gone back to normal to a certain extent.
I wonder, has it carried over into this year? It's sort of become part of the new normal. There's a chart here. Do you remember what the craziest element about it was? The price, the skyrocketing price for a freight container. Can you put that up, Scott? It's just Wikipedia. Can you click on the chart there? I don't know how accurate this is. I guess it's within the ballpark anyway. So it's taking us up to August 2022 on the right. And you can see there it explodes 2021. Okay. For longest time, it's very stable. The market price for a freight container freight was about $1,500.
It started going up at the end of November 2020.
And then it takes off. 2021, supply chain crisis, hitting 11,000 per box.
May, June, July.
It's gone down a bit, but it's still high. 6,000.
But they've just absorbed that into the new normal. Let's say that's the new price. Of course, that means commodity prices are all going up, which they are. Even food prices are going up, etc., etc. So
of course, it did continue. Of course, this year was all inflation, and cost of living crisis. Yeah, so they are acknowledging, and they're trying to normalize it by saying, it's inflation.
This is the new normal,
good.
Yeah.
Inflation's good for you.
Well, there's another legacy. Scott, I sent it to you there a minute ago. It's a Twitter link. Here, this seems to be a legacy of, or an effect, a knock-on effect of. The whole COVID business. This is in Australia. Just how I'll listen there and you'll see what's going on.
A radical plan to crack down on social media abuse is being considered by the federal government. For more, Nine's Oliver Haig joins us live in Adelaide. Ollie, how will it work?
Layla, good morning. Essentially, it will work the same as a passport. Australians forced to submit 100 points of identification, like their driver's licence or passport, when using social media accounts like Facebook and Twitter. Now, police would have access to those social media accounts, and it's all part of a crackdown on online abuse. Now, users could be liable for defamation suits or even criminal prosecution, and it's all part of a plan hoping to deter people from engaging in bad behaviour. Now, the recommendations were handed down by a federal parliamentary inquiry. They're reforms that are being considered by the Morrison government, with the chairman saying there is merit to remove to remove the veil of being anonymous. Layla?
So
The Morrison government, so that's like last year, but okay.
yeah,
Has been rolled out.
yeah.
It's coming anyway.
On
That's kind of de facto the state of play in the UK, where police are ad hoc already coming to doors and saying, you know, you offended someone.
yeah, online harm.
Want to come
yeah.
down with us to the station?
And of course, online harm was a big part of it. Didn't start with COVID, but it was leveraged during COVID. Was that any posts that questioned the
Yeah.
COVID narrative were online harm?
COVID's not mentioned there.
No.
It's all to do with, yeah.
Any kind of harm. So you can't leave it to COVID. You can't leave it to people just talking about vaccines or talking about, you know, health issues. It has to be across the board. Any harm. And of course, that kind of thing, if you're cynical enough, and you don't have to be very cynical, you would realize that that would be used as a tool of control by the government to censor and to prosecute and to intimidate people who were saying anything that the government didn't like, rather, you know, under the aegis of this could cause harm. It would be to control anti-government speech or anything the government, anything anybody said that the government didn't agree with, basically didn't like.
Yep, you can see that. You can also see, going back to the first thing you said on this show, that they have justifiable grounds. Hear me out. All the anonymous troll demons, as Peterson calls them. Everyone having a platform and spouting off with no consequences for their actions. Calling people all sorts of names. There's no real word. Like somebody said recently, some guy who's a UFC fighter in the States, got a following on Twitter. He was called a white supremacist or a Nazi on Twitter by some other UFC fighter. So next time they met, he knocked his lights out. And then he gets back on Twitter and says, you know, there are real world consequences for what you do. There are none, basically, at the moment. It's a free-for-all. So you can see why they have plausible grounds on which to start policing people, because people are popping off. I'm not saying I agree with it, but you can see there's always going to be, the other side's always going to say, they're going to end up supporting. Enough people will support it.
Safety.
Even though we, in our cynic, we immediately see the grounds for shutting people up in political dissent and protest. Even before that, a chilling effect. Once you know the system, that's how it is, you just don't even say it.
Well, that's what's been exposed in the Twitter files. That seems to be at least a large part, or a large part of FBI resources, the cybercrime or the FBI cyber division resources over the past few years, and going back even before, going back to really 2016 and before probably, are dedicated. A large part of the resources are dedicated to censoring speech, and it's not about death threats to the country from foreign malign actors, etc., but it's that, I suppose, that's, you know, what they do as well.
Yeah.
But there isn't much evidence of any Russian bots or anything like that. Of course, that kind of thing happens, and they do have to keep an eye on it. But a lot of it seems to have been, as revealed by the Twitter files, a lot of it seems to have been focused on censoring anti-government, anti-city government speech, anti-Washington DC, anti-establishment speech, and that in this case it was obviously anybody who was supportive of Trump and didn't like Hillary Clinton or Biden. They were the enemies. So it's partisan. It's not just, the FBI obviously isn't an impartial agency. They're obviously partisan. And they were using their power and control in league with Twitter, with the people at Twitter who were ideologically cut from the same cloth, to censor. You know, also the latest Twitter files release shows that they were censoring. The FBI was sending, links to Twitter profiles that had like 1,000 followers, but just because they were saying things that were, and a lot of them were, several of them were actually just obviously satire. All of the posts were satire. And yet they went after them, you know, because we don't like what you're saying.
Yeah.
It's not, can't really be construed as threat at being a danger to national security. You're not Russian, you're not a Russian troll, you're not a Chinese bot. You're obviously some American dude who's got a satire account with very few followers on Twitter, but we're going to highlight your account for censorship.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's interesting to see what's happening now on Twitter, where people are being banned from the other side, in quotes.
What's it Musk did this week? He banned several.
And
I think it was awesome that he banned several major mainstream media journalists, and some of them are just like, from my perspective, they're just they're incorrigible, they're deplorable. But it was fine. I mean, they got reinstated, but it was great as a warning shot, as a message to those people that listen. You're not in some ivory tower. You are held to the same standards as everybody else on Twitter. If you talk shit or you spread misinformation or breach any of the Twitter rules, you're going to.
Yeah.
But that's the way it should be.
Yeah. When people see this kind of stuff like that report from Australia, they go, just like China's social credit system, you know. It's in China, they've explicitly said it's to encourage pro-social behavior and to punish antisocial behavior. So they're picking up on the same thing, same justifications in the West. The problem is antisocial behavior by whose standards? By the current standards of those in power or close to power. Pro-social behavior is drag queens for kids.
Right.
And to criticize it is to be antisocial.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, I suppose, like we're seeing Musk do now with Twitter. He is policing it. They're crying foul and free speech. But actually, this is the correct application of it. And even then, they're getting off lightly. I mean, there's someone who said, this is attributed to Thomas Sowell, actually, the American academic. When people get used to preferential treatment, equal treatment seems like discrimination.
Mm-hmm.
So they're in hysterics, you know. They're just getting treated the same. They're back already, you know.
Mm-hmm. Musk's reason for banning those people was, or temporarily, let's say, suspending those people, those mainstream media journalists, was because he claimed that they had repeated or spread information about his real-time location when he has an active kind of stalker situation going on, and he said that that's not allowed, so you're not allowed to dox people's actual location in real time. You can do it after the fact, but where they were, but you can't say where they are. And there was one guy had a Twitter account that was tracking, for quite a long time, had been tracking the flights of his private jet, Elon Musk's private jet, and he got dumped, right? So, you heard about that, right?
Yeah. The teenager.
Yeah. He...
then he's on CNN.
Yeah, did you see that?
Yeah.
Just listen to it. I mean, it just shows you, again, this is kind of like, this is the kind of clown shoes aspect of it. People are taking this guy seriously, saying that he's just, it's free speech. He's just releasing, public information of public interest, whatever, and he's doing it for the free speech integrity and all that kind of stuff. And but actually, no. This is what he said to CNN.
So, what is your current demand relative to Musk? What will it make for you to go away and stop this?
Still a Tesla or $50,000. I mean, I'm not going to up it. There's no need to.
It's uniquely American, no? He wants money to stop
millennial.
Yeah,
it's blackmail.
So there's a clown shoes aspect to the whole thing there, for example, where you see a lot of people like, people spending, burning out their keyboards, defending this guy and attacking Musk for suspending his account. And then you realize that he says, yeah, I'll go away. I just want a Tesla or 50 grand. Not a lot of principle. That's not a principle stance, really.
Right.
Except the principle of I like money.
Is there ever, though? I mean...
Yeah, well, that's the thing. People talk as if there is all the time.
Are things objectively getting worse, or is there other dynamics at play in the world today that are just revealing how things always were?
That was my question at the beginning.
I know. Well, I've re-asked it because another highlight or low light, is that a word, from 2022 is the rescindance, the overruling of Roe versus Wade. You weren't here at the time, but I did a little show on that topic. because everyone was freaking out. You know, everyone had an opinion about it. So I looked at the original case, Roe versus Wade, and it was crazy. It was completely nuts. The woman was herself quite crazy. What I'm getting at is she, the individual, became the icon or the individual template for which all would follow for the next 50 years. The justification for principled defense of a woman's right to choose. But the woman in question was pretty nuts. I can't remember now exactly, but for example, she ended up being anti-abortion herself, an anti-abortion activist. The daughter that she had tried to have but failed in time to have legally aborted in Texas grew up to hate her mother completely. In typical American fashion, they tried to do a kind of an Oprah Winfrey get-together show. You know, we'll make up, and we'll hug, and everyone will go home happy dappy. They did that, and the daughter still said something. I don't know if it was actually aired in the end, but no, I still can't stand that woman. What she did to me, and blah, blah, blah. But all this time, this raucous debate about the principle, and then the individual in question who became the icon of the entire movement, wasn't all there in the head, / did not have a justifiable case for what she wanted. You know, she wasn't someone who was unjustly treated. She was kind of one of them. She was someone who she was not an average American. She was she was from a very small minority, and it came to represent something that the whole time was unjustified.
Yeah, well, that's history.
It's history, and here it is. This week, Tucker Carlson has articulated for the first time something we've always known, something that I suppose the system never wanted us to know or to allow to be acknowledged on mainstream TV, that the CIA assassinated John F. Kennedy in 1963. Now, that's always been the case. That didn't change this year. So was the world before less clown shoesy and stable and happier?
Even though it
for
was
pretending that it wasn't the case? You know?
Yeah, well, that's part of the... I mean... on that segment on Tucker Carlson, he said that he saw, because basically the segment on Tucker Carlson was in response to Biden supposedly releasing, as every president is meant to do, releasing documents, documents related to the assassination of JFK and everything associated, basically, and they were meant to be released in 2017, all of them, and they weren't. Trump held back X thousands of them. Joe Biden had his opportunity now, and he did the same thing. He kept back several thousand of them for national security reasons unknown. Don't know why you can't. Why would you not be able to release all documents related to the assassination of JFK almost 60 years after his assassination? Because the CIA was involved, and that's why they won't release it, because the CIA would have egg on its face, basically. It would, and then it would raise all sorts of uncomfortable questions for the CIA about, you know, if that's what you guys did back then, and now we have hard evidence that you were directly involved in it, have you changed your tune, or is it the same CIA going around today? Is there anything different, really, or have you actually got worse? So obviously, they don't want to release those kind of documents. But it was well known. I mean, you have JFK at the time. Is that an official quote where he said he wanted to break the CIA into 1,000 pieces?
It's someone writing on his behalf.
Right, he said that. That's right.
Arthur Schlesinger, yeah. There's some dispute about it, but whatever. It appeared in the New York Times.
Well, what there's not dispute about is the memorandum from Schlesinger to JFK in June 30th, 1961, which I think probably gave rise to JFK actually saying that. This was a few years before his assassination, and probably one of the things that led to his assassination. If you just throw it up there, Scotty, it's this is the actual memorandum So Schlesinger was special assistant to the president, to JFK. It was sent on June 30th, 1961, and this is basically a copy of it. So this was part of the documents that should be fully released, but as you can see further down, it's actually, well, we'll go down in a minute, but it's been, a lot of it's, a good portion of it's still redacted. But just go down to page 3 there, the page numbers at the top, you know. Yeah. Scroll down 2 pages, yeah, there you go. So at the very top there it says, for its part, this is Schlesinger reporting to JFK, that for its part the CIA had developed a whole series of functions paralleling already existing functions of the State Department and of the Defense Department as well. Today it has its own political desks and military staffs. It has in effect its own foreign service. It has or had its own combat forces. It even has its own air force. Its annual budget is about blank times that of the State Department. The contemporary CIA possesses many of the characteristics of a state within a state. So if you just scroll down a few more pages, you'll just see some of the redacted parts. If you go, let me see, what page 7? Just go to page 7 there, 6, 7, yeah. Next one. In the second paragraph, the result of CIA's initiative in covert political operations has been to create situations which have forced policy on the State Department. This was not the original idea behind the CIA. As Alan Dulles wrote in 1947 memorandum to the Senate Armed Services Committee, the CIA should have nothing to do with policy, yet in the years since, the CIA has in fact made policy in many parts of the world. A number of governments still in power know that they have been targets of CIA attempts at overthrow, not a state of mind calculated to stimulate friendly feelings towards the United States. And then redacted, of course, is a prime example. And if you just scroll down, you can see in the next page, like, it's pretty much the whole page is redacted, and then page 9, half page 9 is redacted, and there's a whole page at the very end, actually.
It's farcical. It's farcical because people have worked out what's in the redacted parts
yeah.
There's so much history. There's so many books that have been written now.
But that's not even the thing about it. There's other documents that are fully redacted.
Yeah.
That I haven't been released.
Oh,
Nobody
yeah,
gets to see them.
Well,
you know,
yeah.
I mean, that's one of the guys that on the Carlton piece that he did a couple of days ago on this topic, on basically the CIA being responsible for the assassination of JFK. He said that he had talked to someone who had seen those other documents, and the other person had said, and he quoted what he said. He said, yes, pretty much the CIA was directly involved in the assassination of JFK. And the guy himself said that he said everything is fake, basically. Yeah. Our whole country, our whole idea of democracy is fake. It doesn't exist, hasn't existed since then, in the way that people think it has. So yeah, people are living under this illusion that they live in a democracy when they don't, when things happen as a result of their activism or their involvement in democracy and the democratic process, etc., etc. That's how all the world works in America, and
Has the world become clown shoes, or was it always clown shoes?
Yeah, well, it definitely has been. The world has been being run, at least the Western world, and at least in the case of America, and we can maybe extrapolate out to many other parts of the world, the course that they have taken has been directed by people that are not people who have been elected by the democratic process. If that had happened, we would live maybe in a very different world today, but we're living in a world that is being directed, has been shaped by people who are unelected and who work behind the scenes, basically.
I actually kind of get a kick out of the whole, the thing where like each sitting president, they have they have to decide whether or not to release the documents about the assassination of a former sitting president.
As if, right, yeah.
So it's kind of like, I mean, can you imagine, like, here you are, you're the president of the United States of America, and it's like, I got to make this decision, and some dudes from the CIA come in and they say, well, do you want to release this? And they're like, I demand to see and they just show you like one little unredacted page, like, yeah, we blew his brains out. So do you want to release him? And it's like, yeah, it's so obviously hilarious and like horrible.
Except if it's a sitting president, and if it's a president that was brought up within the political kind of world of political sphere in Washington, D.C., they know that well before they became president. They know that who killed JFK. They don't need to be shown any documents. Only people like Trump who would come in and be going,
he'd be like, I'm the boss now.
Yeah. And we're like, I want to see some documents because I don't know what the hell's been going on. This is a guy. It's just a couple of minutes. It's on. His name's Jeff Morley. He's a pretty, stand-up guy. He's, he's an author on JFK. He's, he's seen as pretty middle of the road, pretty standard, and he's an academic. So his credentials are in question, and he spoke, and that's why MSNBC had him on to talk about it. So just have a listen to what he says.
Joining me now is Jeff Morley, editor of JFK Facts blog on Substack, also the author of Scorpion's Dance, The President, The Spy Master, and Watergate. Jeff, good to have you. I guess, what's your reaction to getting these documents and not getting the rest?
Well, what's going on here, unfortunately, is a bit of a shell game. The CIA makes a big claim about they put out all these documents, but when we went in to look at them last night, we discovered that out of 30 documents that they claimed had been released, only about 12 of them had actually been released, and 20 more had been released with many, many redactions in them. So the CIA is giving the illusion of transparency, but not the substance of it. That's the first thing. The second thing is, the CIA has long hidden not just what happened with Oswald in Mexico City, but their interest in Oswald over 4 years. And it was not just the Mexico City station who knew about Oswald. It was senior officials in Washington who were informed about his travels, his politics, his personality, as late as October 10th, 1963. So, the CIA has a big burden here, and their refusal to comply with the law, which was supposed to be implemented in 2017, 5 years ago. This is the fourth time they've blown the deadline in 5 years. Some people will say that's incompetence, but other people are going to say, no, that's suspicious. And I think that the CIA's embarrassment is not just the possibility of incompetence, but in fact that they were using Oswald for intelligence purposes. And that's what they can't come up with. That's what they can't admit now, because it's just too embarrassing. Now, there is no national security problem with that. That's just the embarrassment of the CIA problem. But this is the problem we face. You raised before, who's the backstop? Who's going to say, let's end this charade. This is our history. It belongs to us. It doesn't belong to the CIA. That's where we don't have anybody, we don't have any authority who can step in and say, look, the CIA has to stop this and has to start obeying the law.
Did we find out any more in the documents that were released about Jack Ruby and his motivation?
He says there's no authority that can tell the CIA to release those documents.
Yeah.
What does that say? Well, the CIA is the highest authority in the land.
Yeah.
And they're unelected, right?
Mm-hmm.
So democracy, right?
Deep state.
Democracy.
Democracy is...
Will of the people who elect their officials.
Oh. I think, here's an idea. What if, between this and all sorts of other things across the West over the last few decades, there's a growing, if somewhat unconscious for most people, awareness that the world is not how our narrative setters, like the CIA, tell us it is.
Mm-hmm.
And, they sit with the idea for a while, and then they leave it. They're off with a distraction over here about something. But then it comes back unwittingly. They don't want it to come back. They want to be done. They want to go on holidays and not have to think. But then something else comes up. And that new thing also exposes that there's a permanent government and that my vote counts for shit. And that might be why my bank balance is going down, or my job conditions are getting higher or more strenuous, or my pension age is actually receding further and further in the distance. I'm starting to get the feeling, it's still only a feeling, that something else is in control here. It's not what they tell us. It's not me and my vote. And the government doesn't have my best interests at heart. I think that's having a sizable effect on a portion of the population anyway. Maybe not for most people.
One would hope, like.
I mean, the United States, look how ardent, the belief is so strong. It's what carried Trump into the White House. That and you get schizophrenic in a way, because it was like, this is how the country is / ought to be. MAGA, make America great again. Return us to what we had believed had been the way things work.
Mm-hmm.
And we're putting our foot down now. No, Trump's coming in. He's draining the swamp. FBI, CIA, shut up. The adults are back in charge now. It'll be proper due process and equal treatment of everyone on all issues. And you saw the reaction.
Yeah. Well, that was the reaction of the deep state, i.e. the CIA and others like them. And like he said, this isn't a national security problem. This is a CIA embarrassment problem. But that means that national security, when it's used, is basically used to protect agencies like the CIA, the ones who actually pull the strings. Their reputation is national security, is a national security issue. The reputation of the CIA.
Well, it's more than that. It's also their ongoing mandate, self-given mandate of heaven to rule the world.
Of course, but that would.
So they have the world to lose, not just their embarrassment.
Yeah, well, if they were embarrassed in the way that obviously embarrassment is a bit of a euphemism in a certain sense, because I mean, if it was if there was hard evidence to back up the very likely reality that the CIA was directly involved in and other groups like that were directly involved in the assassination of a sitting president, they would be held to pay. It wouldn't be embarrassment. It would be held.
No, there would be
held to pay.
revolution or restructuring of everything.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's partly what holds ordinary people back as well. The subconscious is a horrible mix of intentions and drives. You know, on the one hand, they want to will back control by us, by the people, for the people, but they're also held back by, geez, this is going to be messy. Like, to really follow through in this, we have to disband a state within a state, and they're armed, heavily armed, and all the money and resource they could probably. They basically control the skies. They have the satellites.
Right.
They can start a war somewhere, anywhere, on our streets.
Yeah.
The riots of 2020.
Well, actually, just go back to the memorandum there, because there's one thing at the very end, the conclusion. It's down on page 14, conclusion, and this is why I think, this memorandum sent by Schlesinger to JFK was what gave rise to the JFK's claim that JFK was planning to smash the CIA into 1,000 pieces. Conclusion. So his conclusion basically is Schlesinger's concluding for JFK that the argument of this memorandum implies a fairly drastic rearrangement of our present intelligence setup. It also implies the capacity of the State Department to assume command of the situation and do so in an effective and purposeful way. If the State Department is at present staffed, as at present it's not capable of assuming effective command, this is not, in my judgment, an argument against a rational reorganization of intelligence. Rational. It is an argument for the drastic overhaul of the State Department. So the first line there, the argument of this memorandum implies a fairly drastic rearrangement of the present intelligence setup.
And that's 1963, and the only way JFK can in any way take that bull by the horns is post-re-election. The CIA knows that, so they're like, eliminate him now.
Right. And it ties into, this isn't just...
The decade... Excuse me. Before the guy mentioned Watergate, it's in the title of his book. I'd be interested to see what Jeff Moore has to say about Watergate. It's becoming more and more apparent that Watergate, before that decade was out, well, actually it was early 70s, but whatever. Nixon was first elected in 68. Nixon was also ousted by the CIA. Watergate was it was a setup within a setup. It was like, it's complex. It's a lot more complex than just shooting him in the head in Dallas, but. Nixon thought he was smart. He's like, I won't be naive like JFK. I'll use their dirty tricks against them. He wanted the family jewels of the CIA. He wanted their secrets so he could have leverage over them. He wanted the executive, the White House, he was going to cleverly use a lever to get himself over them and wrest back some control for the official overt national government. And he was gone.
Yeah. So, and since then, obviously, with the CIA in control, already in control at that point, and since then, just consolidated their control over the past 60 years. You imagine how much control they've been able to achieve since then. And we're not just talking about the CIA. How many intel agencies are there dozens of intel agencies in the US. It's a whole kind of web. But
it's a global apparatus now.
Yeah. But it's percolated. It's not just limited to them, because like they're behind the scenes. They're quote unquote the deep state. They run the show. They're unelected. But their ideology and their thinking, obviously over 60 years, informs or permeates the overt government as well.
Yeah.
It all becomes the overt government just becomes an extension of this government behind the scenes type thing. And it reminds me of that
the very language we use.
Yeah,
the CIA language, conspiracy theory.
Yeah, they made up the conspiracy theory.
A candidate's electability.
Yeah, conspiracy theory
all
came
their
about
euphemisms.
as a result of the JFK assassination and people suggesting that Oswald wasn't alone. Wasn't.
It's pseudo-psychological.
Yeah.
Guff. It's made up nonsense.
It didn't exist before that, really, in the way that it's used today. But if you just go to that link, it reminds me of the reality-based community term. That if you just look at the Wikipedia has an entry on it, which is weird because it was just like a footnote from the Bush W years. But according to Wikipedia, reality-based community is a derisive term for people who base judgments on facts.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, we're post-fact reality, or post-truth, post-fact reality. And it was first attributed to a senior official working for US President George W. Bush by Suskind in 2004. Now, it was said to be, later it was suggested that it was actually Karl Rove, but it doesn't really matter, whoever. And the Bush administration was using derisively this term reality-based community for people out there in the world, ordinary people who think that facts matter.
Yeah.
When in fact they don't, because we make up the facts as we go along.
Yeah.
They're not objective. There's things that we make up, and the actual quote is, just down in Origin there, it says, the aide said that guys like me, so this is an aide in the Bush government, possibly Karl Rove, said to Suskind, a reporter, guys like me were in what we call the reality-based community, which he defined as people who believe that solutions emerge from judicious study of discernible reality. That's not the way the world works anymore. We're an empire now, and when we act, we create our own reality. And while you're studying that reality, judiciously as you will, we'll act again, creating other new realities, and then you'll be fucked, which you can study too. And that's how things will sort out. We're history's actors, and you're just a bunch of plebes.
And then 12 years later, Trump's elected, and they started a hilarious, diabolical twist on this. They say that Trump we're now in the post-truth world where he has his alternative facts. I think because he or his press secretary, the blonde woman, I forgot her name, used that term in trying to push back against the CIA media, telling her, well, no, these are the facts. And she's like, well, okay. And then they used something she said. Oh, I see. So you're going to have alternative facts. Right. The Trump White House living in an alternate universe, you know, which is it's such a mind fuck, because in their own private thoughts, they are self-aware that they are not in the reality-based community. It's those other normies. But then when those normies actually try to take back control of the country, they project onto them that which they know they are, and in the process manage to convince, well, I don't know, for argument's sake, half of the population along with them, that it's this guy,
Trump,
who's just pulling stuff out of thin air. He just lies all the time. Remember the lie counter? Trump's today lied for the 1,730th time.
Right.
Total bullshit.
Yeah, they say that he's just making up facts when they're the ones who are on record as saying that they make up facts all the time.
Yeah.
And you said 16 years later with Trump, but 20 years later we have this. Did I send it to you, Scotty? Yeah. Which is just Matt Taibbi's summation of the last Twitter files release, which is the takeaway from it is that what most people think of as the deep state is really a tangled collaboration of state agencies, private contractors, and sometimes state-funded NGOs. The lines become so blurred as to be meaningless, i.e. they're all just part of the same. He's talking about Twitter, intel agencies, state actors, the government, all that kind of stuff. They're all in it together, and that's because the ideology of those kind of people, of the CIA, the reality creators in intel agencies, the rulers of the world behind the scenes, their influence has infected all of the overt, open apparatuses of state.
Yeah.
And right down to businesses and supposedly NGOs and stuff. They're all of the same mind.
Yeah.
which is we make up the facts as we go along. And it seems to be a left, quote unquote, left way of, it seems to have been taken up by the left, quote unquote, left mindset, let's say, or the leftist personality or the leftist brain, whatever way the leftist brain works, that seems to be favorable to them to make things up as you go along, which, I suppose what I would note is maybe another way to characterize it would be feelings, not facts. That's in the same domain. People who tend towards feelings rather than facts, how I feel is more important than your facts, would be in the reality creation community, right? Because it's how I feel. Whatever's happening doesn't matter. My feeling is that this is the way things are, and therefore that's the way things are. That's very different from facts, right?
Right. I see it more like it's equal opportunity. It's both left and right. In the establishment, you can be neoliberal or neoconservative. So you're on different ends of a spectrum.
No, but in the establishment that means nothing. I'm talking about in the population here.
Yeah.
Neoconservatives and neoliberals are exactly the same. They're just two different monikers for the same people in positions of power who are infected by that CIA mind virus of reality creation. We're an empire now, and we create facts as we go along. In the population that comment on this, it seems that version of reality is more appealing to people who would self-describe as being left-leaning, because maybe taste buds, the way their brains function, the way they function internally with their internal makeup, to the extent that you can divide a population, which Jonathan Haidt kind of did do that with his moral taste buds. He divided conservatives and liberals. It seems that idea of feelings rather than facts is basically what the CIA are talking about. Is how we envision how we view ourselves, how we view the world, and we're going to say, facts be damned, this is what's going to happen, these are the facts. Reality be damned, these are the facts. And that seems to be a thing that seems to be more appealing or taken up more easily by left-leaning members of the population. No?
Yeah, it's just that I'm remembering that for most of this whole CIA control period since 1963, it's been the right. That's been the bread and butter of the CIA support base.
Right.
America's wars, all justified. American exceptionalism, American way of life, American business, the flag, Ronald Reagan, evil empire Russia.
Right.
It's very much...
To the extent... I mean, that works, but the thing about it is that it works when it actually has some basis in reality, when you can make it a reality, let's say. You know what I mean? You say, listen, the evil commies over there, we got to go and defeat the evil commies in Vietnam, and you go over and you do it. Okay, it was a bit of a balls up, and that's not really what happened, and it exposed the fact that that's not really what was going on. That wasn't really about fighting communism. It was about domination of the globe, as much of the globe as possible. So they always had a narrative. But today, they've taken... I mean, the conservatives, okay, they had their flaws and their delusions about, America and policeman of the world and spreading freedom and democracy. But today, it's like the same structures in government, intel agencies, deep state type, Washington establishment people are pushing the idea that men are women.
Sure.
You never get a conservative to do that, but you'll get liberal lefties to do that. Yeah. They'll go there. So they have more of a proclivity, less stronger proclivity to how I feel can really be reality. I mean, there's scope for that, but it has limits. You can't push it too far, you know what I mean? Because there obviously is extreme versions of it where you say, I can fly, and you jump off a cliff because I feel I can fly, I'll jump, and you're going to find out you can't.
Yeah. No, for sure it's dominant today. Like
an extreme version.
Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley.
Yeah,
we have a problem with white supremacy.
Right,
definitely in this country. Dude, you are a white patrician family establishment general.
Right. What are you going to do?
Yeah, it's a problem. But
so you're going to resign?
For me, he's like a dumbass who's using available terms to describe the ordinary population, black, white, Mexican, red. He doesn't care that he sees as a problem because they're all Trump supporters or deplorables or whatever,
Yeah. clown shoes. Do you want some more clown shoes examples? Got a very recent one here from a few days ago. Just throw it up there. People, this is a study. This is in Yahoo News. It's been all other mainstream media news outlets, and they're happy to put this up. You know, it sounds extremely clown shoeish, but it's actually a bit darker and more kind of totalitarian than it seems at first glance. Because you'd think that from the title, right, people who skip their COVID vaccine are at higher risk of traffic accidents, according to a new study. This is a new study published this month in the American Journal of Medicine, like a very high-end, peer-reviewed journal, and they're actually putting this out here. They did a study, and their conclusion was that if you don't have if you haven't taken a COVID vaccine, you might have a 72% more likely to be involved in a severe traffic accident. Now, what do you think the reason for that is? That vaccines protect you from traffic accidents?
I don't know. I can't even.
Well, just from the title, right?
Yeah.
If you're vaccinated, you'll have 72% less chance of being...
Yeah, well, the main thing I'm getting is you'll be safer if you're vaccinated from traffic accidents, yeah.
Yeah, because COVID vaccines protect against impacts from other vehicles. They protect your body. No, but so they're not as stupid to put that out there. But it's, in my opinion, it's equally stupid because the actual reason they're saying that is, well, in the article it says there, of course, skipping a COVID vaccine does not mean that someone will get into a car crash. Instead, the authors theorize that people who resist public health recommendations might also neglect basic road safety guidelines.
Science.
So
Science.
Basically, you're an anti-establishment anarchist if you don't get a vaccine, right? It's not based on any judicious study or observation of reality that made you decide not to get a vaccine. It's just you have this reaction. You're reactionary, right? You're just like, no, I'm not doing whatever the government says and tells me to do. And that then bleeds over into traffic light. No, I'm not stopping at a red light. The government says I should stop at a red light. I'm going to drive through the red light. Oh, shit. So there's science for you. I mean, that's science. That's one aspect of science. That's science on display there. And we're meant to take it because it's been peer-reviewed in a reputable journal, and we're meant to take it seriously. So
that's insane. It reminds me a year ago, like there was a slew of articles. Are unvaccinated people more likely to be psychopaths?
Yeah.
Yes. Why? Because they're antisocial.
Right.
Because they won't do what's good for everyone else.
Right.
Therefore, they're psychopaths.
Oh, they're just smarter than you. Yeah. Ding dong.
Remember,
I've only got more clown shoe stuff, to be honest.
Trends this year, migrant flows continue.
Yeah.
Like crazy. Remember we talked about this and we saw a few reports like from the World Bank, I think, where they're talking about climate migration into the future, not, current. And their projections for hundreds of millions of people flowing usually into Europe or North America. I don't think we're there yet, but we wondered at the time if they had some kind of crystal ball supercomputer models that were telling them that the climate would go kaflooey to some extent and force people to seek food and shelter. I don't know. We're not there yet, but I just looked at some stats. The U.S. hit a new record this year in October. So the year wasn't over yet when this statistic was compiled. NBC News, new record migrants. This is across the southern border. Hard to tell, again, is this objectively the case? I mean, it's happened. I presume those numbers are real. But is it just that they're coming because consequences or because they're encouraged to by a regime that wants them to? Because there are other charts that show that indeed during the Trump years it was throttled way down border crossings. So this is from last week. I think migrant border crossings in fiscal year 2022 top 2.76 million, breaking previous record.
Title 42 was Trump's immigration rule, which throttled. I mean, he had an actual law
they enforced
that enforced, which was down way back in immigration, but it's coming to an end now within the next few days, I think, actually. It's coming to an end. But of course, it's not like everybody's waiting at the border for it to end. I mean, with the change in administration, they figured that it wouldn't be enforced or, in the same way it was under Trump. So, but it's officially coming to an end.
That's almost 1% of the American population just walked over the border this year, breaking the previous annual record by more than 1 million.
Yeah.
Wow. That's huge. But yeah, it may be small compared to what's coming. I don't know how much larger that trend's gonna get. The UK has migrant boats. One capsized this week in the English Channel. They're coming from France. That's, again, is it objectively the case that more people are coming into France and therefore the UK, or is it,
well, what do you call them?
A government dispute between Paris and London?
Peter Hitchens raises a good question, but that is why, if you look at the routes these people take, they're taking it from the Mediterranean, sometimes over Greece, depending on where they land, but they're coming up through multiple countries all the way to the UK. So he says it's not immigration, or rather he says these aren't refugees. If they were refugees, they'd be stopping in the first country that they arrived in, but they're not. They're immigrants. They're economic migrants, who are landing on the shores of the Mediterranean, sometimes thousands of miles from the UK, and their end goal is the UK.
And are they invited?
And they're coming through multiple countries, and
why is it just a shining city on a hill for Europe? The UK?
Europe's America.
Clown shoes. The British government, there were 3 British governments in 1 year. A new record. In the brief Liz Truss government, her grand plan involved opening the borders, mass migration, drastically lowering corporate taxes, bringing in migrants and rebooting the economy. So she, that gave away, so to speak, explicit intention. Now, she was quickly shelved and Sunak was put in instead. But it's interesting that in that little narrow window, mass migration was a key government part of the plan to revitalize the country. So, of course, that's going to signal out, come on, more of you come over.
Why did you... What you said there, you thought that maybe there was some... that there's part of the reason for migration, governments encouraging immigration into the country was because to give people... To save people? To save the migrants?
No, to save the status quo ante of the economy.
Okay.
To slash wages, to drive competition among the plebs.
Right.
So that corporate profits keep.
Right. Yeah. Probably a factor.
And it's translating to real world effects. The 2 largest cities in the UK now have white British natives, or a minority. London and Birmingham. That's new in 2022.
Right.
How far will that go?
It's just going to make, if everything, I mean, obviously people are talking about this year in particular, as we mentioned already, people are talking about economic issues, energy issues, rising prices, etc. They're worried about, there's various different people in positions of power and authority talking about, people who would know, talking about economic crises, inflation, that kind of stuff. And there's an economic kind of crisis or collapse that's going to make the 1930s look like a walk in the park coming very soon. If that were to happen, and it would be fairly bad, I can imagine that having a bunch of newly arrived immigrants, in the millions, would only make things worse in that particular country. No?
Yeah.
You just got far more people dependent on the system for a start. You've also got a bunch of newly arrived people who aren't integrated into the community, let's say, aren't maybe don't have the same values, same loyalty, same, you know what I mean? That takes a while to establish, obviously, once you arrive in a country, but, I think it can just, in the worst case scenario, it only makes things much, much worse in terms of social situation,
Well, overwhelmingly in Europe this year, the migration wave was Ukrainians.
Right.
7.6 million Ukrainians left the country. 2.8 million of those went to Russia. I'm not sure. Oh, yeah, okay. I have it by country in the EU, so I don't have a total, but I think it's about 5 million throughout the European Union.
Mm-hmm.
That could get worse, of course, depending on what happens next in Ukraine.
Yeah. And what's going to happen next in Ukraine, Neil? Come on, give us a lowdown. Get your crystal ball out. Who's winning? Who's going to win? Who's winning in that game? Ukraine or Russia? Or America?
Russia.
Russia. Are you sure they're not? I've read every single day for the past 10 months that Russia's losing. Although they're losing very slowly. They keep losing every single day. I don't know how many times someone can lose before they actually definitively lose. You know what I mean? Yeah, people. I've talked about this before, but I'm just tired of the whole Western reporting in Ukraine. It's 95% lies, disinformation, misinformation. Has been from the very beginning. You expect that, but it's just hard to take. That doesn't explain exactly what Russia's plans are, but I think in general you can always fall back in the general, or you can always fall back on the original aims as stated by the Russians for Ukraine, which was the demilitarization of the country. So they're going to keep going until they have. As far as, to the extent that they're able, they're going to continue until they have pretty much knocked out most of the Ukrainian military, and then see what happens. Of course, big changes will happen in that situation. You know what I mean? There's no more military capability to actually defend Ukraine. There would have to be some serious negotiations in Russia's favor, and I think that's why the West are pumping in weapons to try and forestall that day when Ukraine no longer has a capable military force to actually defend against or attack the Russians. And when that happens, it's all done. And obviously that was going to take quite a long time. The Russians, I don't think, expected that it would take. They didn't expect the extent of the Western support, let's say, maybe for Ukraine, or the persistence of Western military support for Ukraine, to the extent that Russia's fighting more or less a NATO army in Ukraine. But that doesn't change the fact that ultimately that if Russia persists, that ultimately that Ukrainian military can be downgraded to the point that it's only got 20 or 30% effectiveness in terms of manpower and equipment, and at that point it kind of collapses, and that's the job done. And then so
yeah.
But you won't hear that analysis. That's a short analysis, and I think it pretty much sums up the entire situation. And despite that, reams of bullshit have been purveyed by the Western media over and over again that just tell you, would suggest that it's completely different, that this is the end for Putin, the end for Russia, it's over. It's just pure nonsense, But again, like I said many times, that's part of the war effort on the part of Ukraine/NATO. That's fully a part of information war, is fully a part of the actual, kinetic war. And they feel they're entirely justified in their own minds in telling any number of lies, as many lies as possible, that may help in degrading the morale of, say, the Russians, or improving the morale of the Ukrainians and the NATO forces involved, and also world public opinion. There's a big part of this conflict they believe is based on world public opinion, that it can have a real world effect if you can sway opinion on the side of the West, and in terms of improving their morale and their confidence, and degrading that of the Russians. So you just have to suffer that bullshit.
Yeah, no, it's not going to work.
No, ultimately that's where the reality-based community doesn't really. Well, the reality itself, exerts itself on the empire builders, or the empire and the reality creators aren't gonna. They're gonna find out that doesn't really work when you're dealing with an actual military that's capable.
I don't know how much more we're going to talk about Ukraine. We spent the whole year talking about Ukraine. In a sense, 2022 is Ukraine, and everything else peripheral to it. We talked about how Western elites embraced it as a rationale for doing what they were already doing, or giving a new cover for ongoing things like skyrocketing energy prices. The US got its geopolitical ambitions worked out, where they severed, with the help of a little terrorism in Nord Stream, severed European energy connections to some extent from Russia. and they hope the complete retooling and reorientation. There's no more ambiguity. They hope in European capitals, and they're all looking west now to Washington.
That's
and not east.
Yeah, they're Americans are obviously benefiting financially from that. And I mean, if that was an agenda, apart from the actual details of the war and how the war's going and what will happen in the war, if a secondary agenda, or it might even be the primary agenda behind the NATO response to Russia and Ukraine, was to cut Europe off from Russian energy supplies and secure America's position as a dominant power in the world, and by doing that, because it focuses Europe much more decisively on the West, on America, and keeps them in their camp, and that props up the American way of life, the American empire. If that was that might even have been a primary agenda, not in terms of, obviously they did bait Russia into this. So that may have been part of the plan all along. I don't know how far back you put it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
How much credit you give to these people in terms of their long-term planning. Back in 2014, when they started arming and training the Ukrainian military as a NATO-capable military in order to attack or put pressure on Russia, take back Crimea, take back Donbass, and even attack Russia. If in doing that over those 8 years, they actually planned for Russia, knew that Russia would ultimately respond to this force that they were amassing in Ukraine. And then when Russia did that, they would be able to cry, evil Russia, and Europe must cut itself off from Russian supplies. Therefore, America achieves security. I don't know if you can, credit them with that amount of foresight and planning. Maybe, I mean, it certainly fits. That's what happened. Was it all just, oh, look, this is a good idea. Oh, look, now that that's happened, maybe we should do that as well. Oh, yeah, that's a really good idea. Oh, and now that that's happened, let's do this. And all these things just work in our favour. Yeah. Oh, that's really good. We're really lucky.
We speculated that the green agenda was always a sop.
Right.
Largely an American intellectual sop to induce people into this way of thinking, such that when the boom fell and there were no more oil and gas,
right,
it's because, well, it comes from an evil source, which... Yeah.
Right. Well, you can go way back to the beginning of global warming and the whole green, getting rid of fossil fuels. You could credit that to people in the West realizing that the rise of Russia and China was going to be a direct threat to American hegemony, and that both Russia and China, as a producer and the world's largest exporter and the world's largest consumer of fossil fuels, the way to hit them is to stop using fossil fuels, force the whole world to stop using fossil fuels, to go green. But you have to put that back into the 90s then, after the collapse of the Soviet Union. That was their plan then. They saw then that the threat from Russia and China was coming, and here's what we're going to do. Let's start talking about global warming. And everything since then has followed that course.
That's probably too much. But somehow they get ideas in their heads, and it comes together.
Yeah.
Like somebody had a plan.
Yeah. Somebody somewhere.
Well, let's just, for me, this funny commercial, which is currently airing on Russian TV, sort of sums up the situation. What was supposed to happen, they said at narrative level, in February and March this year, is that we're going to, quote the French minister, he said, we're going to totally collapse the Russian economy. He retracted a statement when, it was a little too extreme, but he did articulate what they saw. Biden said the ruble will become rubble, we're going to collapse Russia's economy, blah, blah, blah. So 10 months later, the Russians are playing ads like this on state TV.
Linda Lou, Molly Lily Lou, I love you, Linda Lou. Molly Lily Lou, I love you, Linda Lou. Molly Lily Lou, I love you, Linda Lou. Molly Lily Lou, I love you, kiss me, little baby, tell me that you love me, do my mama, Linda Lou. Molly Lily Lou, I love you, 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 kiss me, little baby, tell me that you love me, do my mama, Linda Lou. Molly Lily Lou, I love you. Hey. Hey.
Epic trolling.
It's glorious.
Yeah.
It's glorious. I suppose that's the Russians saying, well, if you're seriously going to head in that direction and it's to stop us, go right ahead. We'll just sit here awash in cheap
fuel.
energy
Yeah.
and so much heat
Yeah.
in our homes that we have to open the windows in winter because it's too damn hot in here, even though it's minus 40 outside. Fine, we'll laugh at you.
The reality is the West, nobody in the West in positions of power are, it's only the plebes who believe the greening of the economy and doing away with fossil fuels. The elite in the West realize that they're going to continue to use fossil fuels for a long, long time in the future, you know. But the process they're engaged in now seems to be to deal serious blows to the economy. You know, that's what's happening anyway. And like, I don't credit them with being so stupid that they don't see that, they don't realize that. They seem to have this agenda of it's a reset, but it's not about resetting the world on green energy and away from fossil fuels, but rather it seems to be maybe something to do with an economic reset that they either see is going to happen anyway as a result of all sorts of structural problems, and that they're preparing the ground for that, you know. But yeah, I don't really think they know really at the end of the day what they're doing with much clarity. They're just reacting all the time, and it's clown shoes. And on the point of clown shoes, since we started with clown shoes, we'll end with some clown shoes. And clown shoes this is my nominee for the next White House spokesperson. I dearly wish that this person this is Sarah.
Well, we had a
Ashton
black
Kutcher.
lesbian, so it's time for.
She's all over the Ukraine thing. She's my go-to source for objective news on Ukraine.
Yeah,
and what's happening
from the reality base.
Let's have a listen here. This is it. Sums it up really. What's going on?
Vladimir Putin, you are already in hell. We are counting your days down now. Your fascism, your totalitarianism will not get a monument, Vladimir Putin. Slava Ukraini.
The funny thing is, she's pointing to a monument that commemorates the Red Army in World War II.
Right.
Which
Which her new compatriots are busy tearing down when they're not torturing civilians and soldiers.
Yeah. Anyway, if you've got nothing else, I think we'll leave it there for this week. No?
Well, bit of space news. NASA crashed a probe into an asteroid in 2022.
Yeah.
I heard about that in the summer. So I was curious, did they succeed? The point of it was to see if they could deflect it.
Moved it a wee bit.
A wee bit, yeah. It didn't. Anyway.
A wee bit. Come on, it did a wee bit. It was a success. We're putting that down as a success.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was the highlight of 2022.
Yeah.
That was technological progress. Okay.
Yeah, technology, yeah. Yeah. So?
You know what I noticed? When I look back on the year, there weren't any really pronounced weather or climatic events. There were, of course,
a lot of
a
rain,
few.
a lot of flooding,
but it's
a lot of
funny how
mudslides.
we had gotten used to a normal, where there were serious earthquakes or natural disasters in years gone by. 2022 actually...
Year of the drought.
It was a bad drought in Western Europe. There was a bad flood in Pakistan. There was localized extremes everywhere, of course.
In Africa.
But no major... There was an earthquake in Afghanistan.
You're expecting too much. I think there's quite a lot. Yeah. You're just waiting for the apocalypse.
Well, I looked at the insurance companies try and tabulate the costs of things, and by comparison, there was $29 billion in weather damage globally in 2022. That compares with like 50 something more, 100+ billion in 2021. That was quiet compared to the year before.
Quiet before the storm, the calm before the storm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, are we done with 2022?
What are we looking forward to next year?
Madness. More extreme clown shoes and
what happens?
malfeasance.
We've got to be a new. Where do you go from clown shoes? What's the
Bigger
name?
clown shoes.
They just get bigger.
With a scary clown in them.
The full suit.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That's what we're looking forward to. Well, we'll just have to wait and see. It's like the next season. You have to wait to see what's in the next season.
Nazorius says, any predictions? Come on.
Any predictions for next year? what may await
Russia's
us and
gonna
what
win
would be the
bigly in
best
Ukraine.
approach to deal with that? What may await us and what may be the best approach? What awaits us next year is, worse. Just imagine this year, but worse. Like increase of 20% more bullshit, 20% more chaos, 20% more clown shoes,
20% more inflation.
20% more inflation, more economic issues, more economic problems. Maybe Russia and NATO having
Hot clashes.
a little bit of direct contact, but probably NATO forces, such as they are, kind of collapsing pretty quickly because they're clown shoes, and they're not really, their heart isn't in it at all. They're just, it's kind of like, NATO's like the guy behind the bully in the schoolyard, you know, going, yeah, get him, but when the bully leaves, he like runs away, you know. They don't have any real commitment, or they may have a bit of ability, but they don't have the commitment, and they don't have the unity. I mean, what did you hear this year in 2022? Unity of NATO.
Yeah.
Russia's invasion has just massively increased NATO unity. It hasn't. It's unchanged in its disunity. I mean, NATO is America's united in terms of the deep state, but that's it. There's no unity among thieves, and that's what NATO is. So forget about NATO being any kind of an
That's
effective
why
force against.
they ran up the idea, Petraeus, of a coalition of the willing,
right?
A NATO within NATO, because we can't get the whole of NATO.
Exactly, yeah. And they're not prepared. They haven't fought wars, especially European NATO countries. Just are clueless. They're no match for the Russian military. So maybe something along those lines. Definitely economic foobar next year, especially next winter. I mean, that's a year away, but next winter is going to be a tough one for a lot of people. But we'll survive, and it'll continue on. And you're just going to have to steel yourself for more nonsense, more ridiculous, more lies, more disinformation, all presented as the truth. So you just have to flip it on its head in most cases. But yeah, just keep watching, keep your eyes on the skies, keep your eyes on the ground, keep your eyes on all of the shenanigans, and just pay attention and don't believe any of it too hardly. And yeah, wait and see what comes. Okay. So have a good Christmas, everyone. Thanks for watching, listening, commenting. Don't get too inebriated, or don't eat too many goodies, because it'll make you feel bad, and you might regret it. And the new year will be here before you know it, and we'll be into it before you know it. So fasten your seatbelts. It's going to get rocky.
See you next year. Bye,
See
everyone.
ya.
Thanks for watching. Happy New Year.
Can't stop the signal now.